All right, let's get into our next guest, Emmanuel Cassimatis. Emmanuel, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yes, and thanks for having me. Hello to all.
All right, my pleasure. All right, now you are author of a book, SAP Private Equity. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Give us some background on you, background on your book, and then let's walk through the things that you're here to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. I work at a corporate VC fund called SAP.io in Europe, part of the large software company SAP. So we help fast-growing companies in the SaaS B2B space, and this covers many spaces within the digital area. Part of my job is spotting companies that grow really fast, and I was always fascinated by the acceleration of our times. I've been an entrepreneur several times in my life, and I guess part of this realization on the speed of the world right now and entrepreneurship led me to writing a book, which is basically about the acceleration of the world.
Talk to us about that, the acceleration of the world and the three phenomena that cause the compounding, connectedness, and the silicity effects.
Yeah, sure. So the times we're living are quite fascinating, and I force myself not to take them for granted. I think if we ask anybody about how they feel about the world, they'll say that, yes, they feel the world is going fast and accelerating. I mean, we talk about digital acceleration, we talk about population growth, we talk about economic boom, there's progress in health, we talk about data explosion, and everywhere things seem to be going faster and faster. If we take some numbers, the world population is adding a staggering 1 billion people every 12 years now. 1 billion people every 12 years. The global GDP has been basically multiplied by 10 in a century. If we look at resources like copper or aluminium, they've been multiplied, the production has been multiplied by 50 over the past 50 years. And we could go on and on and on. And the trend, it seems to be accelerating everywhere. And so the question becomes why? It seems after studying at least three effects are explaining it. First one is, of course, a compounding effect. So the more we accelerate, the more this acceleration accumulates. And so it actually fosters greater acceleration. Then there's the cyclicity effect. Nobody knows if we are currently in an upward acceleration trend because nobody knows if we are in a cycle now. And it seems most of the things around us are actually governed by a cycle. And then the connectedness effect is the simple fact that all the things we do, all the things we produce, all the things we create in the world are connected. So when the population grows and the economy is making progress and the technology is improving, well, basically the one affects the others, and the overall growth that is generated is basically even bigger and faster.
You know, I have a little. Let me jump in there with you on this because I have a little experience with cycles, time cycles, and two things happen: either it cycles to a peak, or it cycles and breaks through, and it's actually an acceleration point, and it's a kickoff to a bigger, larger cycle. How do you see that with the way the things that you've just explained here, all the the ramp up and how we're moving? I mean, how do you see that? How does Emmanuel see that?
Emmanuel is just one citizen in the world, but I think you're completely right. There is a big question around here, around where we are. If we believe that there is a cycle, and if we believe that everything is cyclical in the world, then that's a very valid question. Where are we in this cycle? And if that's a very valid question, it's also valid to imagine that we are at the peak of the cycle. That's one scenario out of many. And I guess the question becomes, if you're accelerating that much and there's a possibility that you are at the peak of a cycle, should we be doing something about it and basically protecting ourselves from any downsides and downwards trend that may follow.
Emmanuel, let me interrupt you now because we have a hard break. But you really hit a hot button with me, and I have a lot of questions for you. Let's take a break and come back on the other side with more. Okay?
Absolutely.
All right, Emmanuel Cassimatis with SAP.com, and I want to get into more content with this on the cycles of where we really are. You've been listening to CEO Money with Michael Yorba, the segment brought to you by Tycon Partners. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba, your host, speaking with Emmanuel Cassimatis with SAP. All right, Emmanuel, we were talking about cyclical analysis when it comes to a global perspective of what's going on with the connectivity and the compounding of geopolitical and economic events and how they affect people on a broad spectrum and where we are in the cycle. I wanted to give you a chance to come back because we had to end abruptly. What you were saying, because you ended with, if we're at the peak, we need to start talking about protecting ourselves, and then let's move into the 7 potential themes that you outlined for us.
Yeah, sure. So basically, the theory is the following: if we are accepting that we are indeed accelerating, the question becomes, what is the right speed of acceleration for us? There is a universal relationship that can be verified in sports, in physics, in any field, virtually any field, between speed and control. The faster an element goes, the more control this element potentially loses. So the question becomes, if the world is growing really fast, can the world lose control? I think there's an opportunity more than a threat today for the world to basically control its growth and ensure that the growth becomes sustainable. It may seem like a complex endeavor. Actually, it can be a very simple one. It's a case of analyzing what is going on in population, economy, technology, data, environment, society, health, etc., and putting in place mechanisms that can provide the right governance at a global level to ensure that we're not growing too fast.
Don't you think our governments are going to have to change because of the way the cycles are? They're going to have to change the way that they relate to the population.
I am completely convinced that the current way that the world is governing itself is not the optimal way. Governments are central and are centered around their own country missions, and they should. But when we realize that all the fields I mentioned, from population to economy to technology, are by themselves and immediately global, we realize that there is no mechanism today to actually govern these fields in a global way. So today, yes, I think there is a lack. There is something missing in the world, some governance mechanism. I am not saying something that replaces the government, but something that complements the government, potentially something that advises the government on what to do and what not to do. The governments will always remain sovereign. They need to remain sovereign. But today there is a lack of, I don't know, is it a committee of wise people? Is it a central advisory planning body? Something that basically gives the world a plan and enables a global view, basically, of these trends.
Okay. Well, how does the 1 billion in population? I just had a question come in. I'm going to read this here. We're going to bring in a question from the audience. How does the 1 billion in population growth play a role in managing the global sovereignty?
Say that again. What's the question? Sorry.
Okay. How does the 1 billion in population growth play a role in managing global sovereignty? That's a question from one of our listeners.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the world is adding 1 more billion people every 10 years. And the question is, how do you involve those people so that they can basically take a role in this governance? That is a very good question. Maybe the answer goes through the use of technology, the use of data, the ability to connect those citizens and enable them to voice their opinions. Maybe this goes through this committee that we talked about before, a committee of wise people that can collect basically idea and votes and centralize ideas at the global level and then trickle them down into specific governments. It's this idea that as the world grows and as topics are definitely global, well, maybe it's time that the world thinks about topics in a global way and plans for the right amount of growth.
I agree with you. We've got about a minute and a half left. Of the 7 potential themes, can you walk through those with it in that time period? About a minute and a half for what we have left.
The 7 potential things are the 7 potential fields that you. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Sure, I'll lead you off. Demography and growth versus control of inequalities, technology and data growth versus control and regulation, environmental priorities versus optimal timing.
Absolutely. So, those are 7 fields that are global and were covered in the book. 7 questions that the world could ask itself. So, in population, are we in hypergrowth mode or are we in out of control modes? In economy, are we in hypergrowth modes? And is the consumer society growing, or are we growing inequalities, and are we creating overconcentration in the world? Technology is growing, and many fields are appearing from mobile to robotics to artificial intelligence, but how do we control the connectivity is the question we can ask. Data, the same thing, it's exploding, but the question becomes how do we control saturation of information, privacy loss, and job specialization. And we see here that many fields are covered. Probably I don't have time to cover the 3 remaining, but the global idea here is it's a time of opportunity. The world has never grown faster. All fields are reinforcing themselves, and we need to come as global citizens together to find the solutions to basically make this growth sustainable and reasons. That's the basic message. I hope this is a very big debate and a very big conversation, and I hope the writing of this book, so it's called The Accelerating World, Speed versus Control. You can find it on Amazon. I hope this book gives ideas and basically enables people to further talk about it and find the solutions of tomorrow.
One more time, the title of the book that we can pick it up at Amazon, right?
Yeah, sure. The Accelerating World, Speed versus Control.
All right. Emmanuel, thank you so much for being a guest on our show. I sincerely appreciate that, and I want to have you back again because this was a very stimulating conversation for me.
With great pleasure. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Emmanuel Cassimatis with SAP.com. And we're going to take a break right now. And on the other side of this break, we're going to come back with our third guest. And that third guest on the other side of this break is going to be, let me pull that up, Jordan Goodman. We're going to talk about the new tax initiative that we've got going through our government right now. We'll be right back. This segment has been brought to you by Lots of Yachts. You've been listening to Michael Yorba on CEO Money.